Alright, so today we're going to talk about Gung Fook, man taming the tiger. We're going to focus on like 3 techniques specifically and their function, and then we're going to talk more about the history of the form, history of the style, and my own interpretation of what the name of the form is supposed to imply. So without further ado, we're going to go right into using the techniques. So the first technique in the, well, not the first technique in the form, but at the very beginning of the form, after you do the 3 breaths, this section here. I've seen a little bit of variance to that relative to other people's method of practice. I personally don't care about that. I think that forms are meant to be varied, to suit each practitioner's own needs, stylistic preferences, and the list goes on. So that movement there, you're drilling 2 things at the same time. And I feel like this goes without saying, but you would never use it like that. You're not going to, use 2 hands at the same time in this way. However, we do have the concept of what we do to one side, we do to the other. And you'll see that in the Hungar system a lot. I'm not going to say all, but many, if not most of the moves are done on both sides. You can see there's a spear here, which is literally just a straight strike. Now, I recommend not striking this way because unless you've done the training for your fingers, you're just going to end up hurting yourself. So I always change it to this when I'm drilling. This way is fine too, it doesn't really matter. This movement here is just a block. I throw, something's incoming, I block. Or parry, however you want to word it. And this movement here depends on how you want to look at it. When I'm practicing it in the form and not drilling it separately, I think of it as an elbow strike. And you'll see in my interpretation of it, I use this as a block. Here and then here. In my branch, my style, we do the crane beak 3 times and then we close it on a 4th time with the tiger claw. The difference is with the crane wing, we're redirecting, right? Something's incoming, we're just moving it out the way. We're not locking on to it. With the tiger claw, it's implied that it's a grab or a scratch. So one way to look at that is if I've covered here, because the antecedent movement is here, the following movement is this. So if I've covered, I come in and strike here, and I can scratch if I need to. When I say scratch, I don't mean like, I'm just going to claw at someone's cheek. No, when I'm thinking scratch, I'm thinking about like digging into somebody's eye socket. Now, so you have the scratch here, and then that's followed by this, and then we get into the next, but we're not going to cover the rest part. So the traditional movement does it on both sides. It's just training the same thing on both sides. Now, I think it's best to drill it in a way that you're not using the same hand. So if I'm drilling it in like a fighting position, right, I'm not going to like, yes, somebody comes in, I'm going to move, spear, then I'm going to block, then I'm going to block, and then I'm going to hook, and then I'm going to spear again. No. If you're using one hand too much, A, you become super predictable, and B, you just have this hand up here for minimal purpose. So if I'm here, right? This implies that I've blocked a hand if I'm dropping this hand down, right? 1, 2. So odds are they're going to come at me with a different hand. I'll cover here. Then the next movement, this claw down, I see it as a grab. So perhaps they throw a hook. I'm covered, I'm already in close, I grab, and then come in with a knee. That's not in the form, it's not implied in any way when you're practicing, but neither is any kind of movement, right? Because you're in one stationary position. So, you can have the freedom to create, the freedom to adjust how you're going to use those movements. The next movement that we're going to cover is going to be right after this section. Do a little steppy step, block, then kick. Movement is literally just pick up and kick. There really is no hiding or disguising the function of that technique. The pickup of the knee is just a block. And there's two different ways that I can see that working. One is just a check, right? Someone throws a low kick, you check, or you pick up to evade. The other option is to kind of scoop. When that kick is incoming, you're basically holding on to it with your foot. And from that point, you can do that low side kick to their knee, to the inner thigh, or if you want to throw the front kick to the groin, that works too. The next technique we're covering is a little bit more in depth, and it's another one where there is a lot of variance, and it's very hard to kind of explain it without having a partner to demonstrate on or with, but I'm going to do my best. So you can see here is the movement. You do the hook, block, hook, kick, come around, and block. These hooks, again, are the same as these hooks here. They're redirections. It could literally just be this if, this hand position feels uncomfortable for you. And the reason we use this hand position is relative to sensitivity. So if you do Wing Chun or any kind of like push hand, sticky hands, any amount of contact that you can establish with your, I'm going to say partner, is going to help you to gauge their movement. So if I kind of use these as feelers, right? So if I'm establishing contact and these fingers are in contact with my opponent's arm, I can feel if they're pulling back, if they're pushing forward. That's the theory anyway. Okay, so moving on from that, the movement is redirect, strike. This strike here is with the heel of the palm. That's pretty straightforward. Again, if this hand position feels awkward or you don't like how it makes your elbow kind of contort outwards and opens up, you can just redirect here and strike. This strike is up here or up here in terms of target. You can't really see that. Up here. You could change it if you want to one and then move on to the next one, or however a million different ways you can do it. Now that following movement is another redirect. However, I personally like to see it as similar to what I see this claw as like a grab. So I've redirected, I've struck, and then I'll grab. And counter to how the form does it, I would rather grab this way because it just feels secure. Grabbing someone's head like at this weird angle doesn't feel right. So I'll grab on, and then there's the side kick. So that side kick I would trade out for a knee if I'm grabbing. Now, if I'm redirecting a strike, or if I'm just like kind of pushing their head, and what I mean by pushing their head is pretty literal, as in you would push that way instead of like hook on. And then I'll throw the kick. And that's going to move their body towards the kick. And that can be planted into their ribcage or into their face. You would just have to change the foot position. So if you're kicking at their face, you'd want to kick with like the shoelace area and turn it more into how we would do a roundhouse. Or if you're kicking the ribs, you could do the roundhouse, or you could plant like with the side of your foot for a side kick. And that turnaround, when I think about that turnaround, it doesn't really follow my interpretation of that movement on either way. So when I think about that, I'm thinking of, okay, why would I be spinning around? So I'm thinking if I'm throwing that side kick and it doesn't connect right, or if they're coming in harder than the force that I'm implying, I'm going to get pushed back. So instead of just like stumbling backwards, it's teaching you to just be more in control of that pushback. And that's a little wonky, and again, it's very hard to explain that without having somebody in front of me, like live, so that I can show you what I mean. But I hope conceptually it makes sense. If not, you can drop a comment, and I will see about finding somebody that's willing to partner up with me, and I'll drill it with them so that I can better explain it. Okay, so we have covered the three movements. So now it's time to talk about what is this? What is this form? What is the name? Why? How? What? Who, what, when, where, why, and how? So, Gung is considered the first Hung Gar form. Now, if you ask me, I believe that Gung is one of the first Southern Shaolin forms, or at least the core Southern Shaolin form taught to the main five families: Hung, Lao, Choi, Mok, and Li. And I have drawn that conclusion in that if you look at Choi Li Fut, if you look at Lao Ga, you look at Hungar, they are all so similar. And you can see a lot of their similarities in Gung Ji. You know, Choi Li Fut has this movement, Hungar has this movement. You'll see some Choi Li Fut guys doing this, you know, and this movement is pretty consistent. So, and Lao Ga looks like a Hungar form. So you look at those styles, and I see a lot of lines that connect. And of course, each individual person, each individual style decided to take what they find most valuable from this set and build on it and add new things, take out things that they don't think works, and so on. I have no commentary on Mok because I've never really seen the style. I've seen some people do it online, and to me it looks very much like Long Yin Kun or Five Ancestors Fist, White Crane, along those lines, more than, you know, Choi Li Fut, Hungar, Lao, Choi. Yeah. Also, history aside, Man Taming the Tiger. There are a lot of different interpretations of that name. That first letter, Gung, is just literally, it's the character that's in the shape of a letter I because the form moves in that pattern. Nothing too significant there. The name of the form, Man Taming the Tiger. I believe that the name of this form is more of a metaphor for people needing to control their emotions. And when I think of the word man, I think of it as mankind in a very general sense. You know, human beings need to tame their internal tiger. And when people think of tigers, they generally think of ferocity, you know, intensity, strength, power, and all of those very aggressive attributes, which are not necessarily bad to have, but they need to be on a leash. They need to be controlled. So to tame the tiger means to take stock of our emotions, own them, and control them. It is a very long form. It is a very strength-based form, and it has an aggressive nature to it. So it's learning to be that way, learning to put all that force into certain things, to exert that aggressive energy, but being able to take a breath and let it out. Now, the people that created the names for movements in Chinese martial arts were very poetic, which is why it's not so far-fetched to believe that they would create a form and name it something that's completely irrelevant to the martial arts context. And again, it's also not so far-fetched in that Chinese martial arts was made by monks. Well, okay, it wasn't made by monks, but it originated from India and was developed further by monks. And it branched off from there and did its own thing. But there is a philosophical component to it that's rooted in the practice that I believe cannot be neglected. And yes, we do spend a lot of time looking at these martial arts applications and learning how to apply it and blah, 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 blah. But this, to me, is the core of the practice, the root of it, the most important part, because if we cannot take stock of our emotions, if we cannot own them, if we cannot control them, we have no business practicing martial arts. And relative to this form, if we cannot tame the tiger inside of us, if we cannot control its ferocity, if we cannot direct its tenacity to positive means, to building better relationships, to building better people, then what's the point? So yes, Hungar is considered to be a very strong, power-heavy, aggressive, perhaps, system, but you have to remember that Hungar is not just the tiger. Hungar is the tiger. Hungar is also the crane, which is the softer side, which is why I like to say that Hungar is grace under pressure, because we have the pressure, but it's balanced out And it goes deeper than just a physical component. It's not just about punching and kicking and fighting and hurting people. It's about building yourself better, breaking yourself down, and building on that, which is why I think the length of this form hints towards that idea. Because if you do this form at 110% intensity, by the time you get to the end, you should be beat. You should be, your heart is beating out of your chest, your breath should be going. Even if you practice breath control, even if you work on that, even if you practice for years, because my intensity today is not going to be my intensity tomorrow. I should be progressing. So the intensity with which I practice should be consistently improving, which means my form should be consistently challenging. And with that comes a whole new caliber of skill set. With that comes a whole new understanding of the depth in which Chinese martial arts can reach. It's, again, and I feel like I've kind of reiterated this point, it is not just about fighting. And yes, this channel will continue to talk about martial arts and how Kung Fu is applied, because it's my objective to make sure Kung Fu has relevance in the topic of martial arts. And right now, the current state of things, it's not. It is looked like it. People look at it like they look at Aikido, and it's not. And and I really should not be saying anything about Aikido because I don't really know anything about Aikido, but I do know how people look at Aikido. And Kung Fu is such a in-depth practice, and it does take a lot of time to get good as a fighter, but it also takes a lot of time to just understand the root of the practice. What is it that we're really trying to do here? And it's important that we don't forget to look at the original intent of this practice, which was to make people stronger, which was to make people more suited for their religious practice, which is the root of our origin. And it developed further, and it became a tool to master mind, body, and spirit. Now it grew into a fighting art. And the fighting art is important because I can't really master my mind, body, and spirit if I'm being assaulted and I can't protect myself. Back in those days, because back in those days things were different. Now, we are not all, but a lot of us are, especially if we have the funding and time to commit to martial arts practice, we are in more peaceful times where we're not worried about bandits and people running into our homes or trying to steal my shit and stuff like that. So we can focus on the character building, the philosophical component, and apply it to the practice. Okay, so we've talked about Gung Ji, we've looked at some of the applications, and we've discussed a little bit about the history and a little bit about some of the philosophy behind Kung Fu in general and the name of the form. Next week, we'll take a look at Tiger Crane, a few more movements from Tiger Crane, and then we're going to cap on the Hung Gar stuff because I've coincidentally made this month all about Hung Gar stuff. That was not my intention, it just kind of happened. Again, it's my style of preference, so I just feel like things naturally sloped down that way. However, next month we will talk about a different topic. I'm not sure if I want it to be on Northern Shaolin or different weapon systems. And with that said, appreciate you all. If you guys have any questions, drop them down below and support me. I am on Instagram, I am on TikTok, I am on Facebook, I am clearly here, I am everywhere. So drop me a link if you see something cool and relevant that you want me to talk about. Comment down below, drop some emojis, drop some support, ask me questions. Help me to better help my audience, engage. And yeah, see you all next time. Appreciate your time.